Chapter 41. Hasbrook wrote, I am once more safely landed at the judge's hospitable mansion, the home of Judge Nathan Ford. Arrived here today about 1 o'clock, took my dinner, and proceeded to view the wreck of our village. I had on the road learned the dreadful havoc which was made, and which I found so much exaggerated that I was quite disappointed. It is true that the village looks desolate and deserted, but it does not bear marks of that violent outrage that I was led to anticipate. The windows of Mr. Parrish's house, now the Remington Art Museum, McCollum's, Slosson's, Turner's, and mine are the greatest sufferers. The lower force of the British entered the village near the slaughterhouse, proceeded up the street till the rear of Mr. Roseal's, now the Ogdensburgh Public Library, and there divided, part going up by the side of Mr. Parrish's house, and the others going past Mr. Mayo's. The two met our forces, Lytle's, at Mac's Corner, where the principal part of the engagement took place, and of consequence the houses on that corner suffered most. When Lytle's men retreated, the enemy took our cannon, and placing it in the street near our house, fired from there at Forsyth, which broke our windows about one half in the front and nearly the whole in the end toward the street. The party that attacked above the village was not exceeding 150 men, and they were driven back by Forsyth. But when the village party succeeded, they again rushed on, when Forsyth retreated up the St. Lawrence 2 miles, and to the Black Lake and to Kellogg's, and the next day proceeded to Sackett's Harbor, where he now is, and where Lytle's company also is. They joined Forsyth a little before his retreat, crossing the bridge in going to him. The loss on either side was small. We had 3 killed, and they about 20, but a good many more wounded on either side, and some have since died. None of the citizens were killed or wounded. A soldier's child was killed in Mr. Tuthill's house by a ball that passed through. Indeed, so completely were our people taken by surprise that many of the inhabitants were scarcely mustered before the British had possession of the place. Their force was not exceeding 500, from the best information I can obtain, ours nearly the same. Mrs. Joseph Roseal and sister jumped out of bed and, half-dressed, started in their sleigh, just as the British were coming up from the slaughterhouse, and fired a charge of grape and canister shot, which passed just over their heads, thought they were dead enough, but proceeding found themselves unhurt, went as far as Kellogg's, and the second day returned home. Mrs. Rue remained in her house, and neither herself nor her property was injured. He had not returned home. Slosson and his wife were gone to Schenectady, Mrs. Goff gone to Boyd's, Mrs. Dimmick absent, Mrs. Benedict gone to Connecticut. Indeed, the greater part of the female villagers happened to be absent. Mrs. Scott remained in her home and saved her property. Mrs. York fled and lost all. Many of the male villagers were taken prisoners and carried across the river, St. Lawrence, but suffered to return the next day. A great deal of private property was plundered, and many have lost nearly all their clothing, but I have no doubt from all I can learn that not a small part was taken by our own people, who in the general confusion decamped with their booty, such as Bonker, Watson, Fitzpatrick, and such like characters. Some of the Lisbon people, I am told, also came in for a share. I have made but a short excursion in the village this afternoon, and therefore will not attempt to give you a particular statement of all that has happened, but merely such facts as I learned. I went into my house to see the destruction there, and am happy to tell you I found it much different from what I expected. The inside of our house is not the least injured, neither is the furniture. Everything which was not carried off remains the same as I left it. Nothing that I can discover was taken but my gun, clothes, and papers. Many of my papers, I fear, are lost, but I have not had time to look them over. The furniture in the rooms and kitchen appear not to have been disturbed, the cellars not touched, vegetables, meats, and other articles all safe. The pantry, closet, and that under the stairs have not been opened. On the whole, I think we escaped pretty well. My barn is finely peppered. The corner nearest the house and next to the street has upwards of 100 grape shot in it, which was made by Forsyth's shooting at the British well in front of my house. The piece appears to have been elevated a little too high, passed over their heads, and entered the full charge into the barn. Thus have I given you a hasty sketch of such particulars as came within my observation this afternoon. Mrs. McCollum came over 2 or 3 days after the capture to learn the fate of her husband. She is now much pleased with him, and they have taken a jaunt to Cooperstown. I met Mrs. Conant, Lydia, and family at Indian River on her way to Trenton, where she was at length concluded to go for safety. She appeared very reluctant to go, and I really believe I could have persuaded her to return home again. Conant was with her. He has taken her to Mrs. Perkins and returns immediately. Mrs. Sheriff Davies has returned home with her family and is now at Black Lake. George Davis and his family moved to Trenton. So we go, some one way and some another. 6 Indians a few days since went through all of our Oswegatchie settlement and frightened the people very much. They behaved very peaceably, and after traveling across the Black Lake to near Kellogg's returned home. They were sent here by Colonel McDonnell as a party of observation, understanding that a military force was coming on, and he wished to ascertain the fact. He now promises not to send them again. I wrote you from Albany, informing of my arrival there, remained till Sunday afternoon, went to Schenectady, took the stage Monday morning, and arrived at Utica at 11 at night, found David and family well and in bed, intended to drop you a few lines from there, but Sister Abby, promising to write, left it to her. Tuesday at 12 started with W. Campbell, Miles' son-in-law, whom I found in Utica, and arrived here today, in good health and a tolerable degree of comfort. There was no snow on the Mohawk, came on which to Utica, but from there on a sleigh, and found plenty of snow. I scarcely ever saw so great a body of snow as we now have here. It is at least 3 feet on a level. The ice on the river is as solid as a rock, and all nature here indicates the severity of winter. The weather on Tuesday, when I left Utica, was very warm, but on Wednesday and Thursday I found it as cold as I have experienced this winter. I came by way of Rossy, found Mr. Benbow hard at work at his iron factory, and nothing but my return wanting to make contracts for the turnpike. The military campaign has not yet opened. General Dearborn, I expect, finds Sackett's Harbor too cold. He arrived in Albany the day before I left it. They have, I understand, 6,000 or 7,000 men at the harbor, and still are concentrating. I met Colonel Simon's regiment, about 700, at Indian River, and a dirtier set of men I never saw. They, that is we, are building a frigate there, and about 200 flat-bottom boats for a descent on Kingston when we get ready. The British also are building 2 vessels at Kingston and 2 at York, and boats at the former place. I expect from these movements that the campaign will commence there. I have thus, my dear wife, given you a hasty and unconnected sketch of events as they occurred in my mind, in which I presumed you would be interested to know. I have not written it for publication, and therefore you will not criticize it nor suffer it to come within reach of others' remarks. It is now 12, and I sincerely pray this will find you in good health, and that of the captain and of Mrs. Graham restored. Kiss the dear children for me. Adieu. God bless my dear wife fervently. Prays her affectionate husband, L. Hasbrook. The letter was franked at the upper right in Hasbrook's handwriting, Free, L. Hasbrook, P.M., Ogdensburg, New York, and at the upper left was the handwritten cancellation, Ogdensburg, New York, March 27th. There was no envelope. The 4 large sheets on 2 pages were folded to form the cover. The Hasbrook home was in the old triangular block, bounded by Ford, Isabella, and Water Streets. Water Street later was named the Crescent. Hasbrook, 1777 to 1834, married Catherine Bank. He became the St. Lawrence County Clerk on March 10, 1802, and served until 1811, and again from 1813 to 1817. On April 1, 1807, he became the first postmaster at Ogdensburg. He was the first president of the old village of Ogdensburg, incorporated April 5, 1817, second supervisor of the town of Oswegatchie, a state assemblyman and state senator. In 1834, he was named president of the old Ogdensburg Bank. Ball and grape shot from the Battle of Ogdensburgh are part of the military collections at the Ogdensburg Public Library, with the following memorandum signed L. Hasbrouck, Ogdensburg, 1851. One of the grape shot fired by Old William Church at the British from the point at the old barracks while they were halted on the hill opposite the old Hasbrouck house. On the day Ogdensburg was taken, February 22, 1813, the British fell as the charge was fired, and it went over their heads and lodged in the L. Hasbrouck barn, from which this ball was extracted in July 1851 when the barn was moved round.